Hi everyone. This video will provide the lecture for week 7 of Theories in Career Development and will cover constructivist and narrative approaches, which are taken from chapter 11 of the Scharf textbook. So far, we have looked at trait and factor theories, which were covered by Frank Parsons' model, work adjustment theory, and Holland's theory of types. And we've also looked at lifespan theories, including Donald Super's model and other related theorists. Constructivist and narrative approaches are considered special focus theories. They focus more deeply on the process of working with the client, and they require more advanced counseling skills and techniques. And I must say that in trying to lecture about this particular theoretical framework, it's a bit more challenging because there are really specific applications to them, ways to apply them with clients that are a little bit hard to explain. You'll see within the chapter, and I'll show you an example of activity in a few minutes that will illustrate more clearly to you how these particular approaches are to be applied. Constructivist and narrative approaches are considered descriptive in nature rather than prescriptive, and they see clients as meaning makers. And this means that we focus on the client's interpretation of their experiences and meanings they give to events. So this is all about the client's perceptions and the client's interpretation of the things that happen to them throughout their career. Constructivist and narrative approaches are a little hard to distinguish really and separate out. There's a lot of overlap between them. And some of the common themes between the two is that they rely on exploring life stories, helping clients to identify themes and patterns in those stories, helping clients to identify and rewrite limiting narratives within their stories. They're also effective at emphasizing and taking into account the client's context, and in particular, cultural influences, relationships, social influences, and so on. And they also focus on the idea of agency, which was referring to the capacity to act and to construct their future career. And you will see how we do that through looking at client stories and unpacking those stories. So if we just talk about constructive approaches, constructivist approaches just for a moment, these focus on broader meaning systems and identity construction over time. So emphasize more the idea of life themes, adaptability, integrating roles into their life and their career. The development of this approach was influenced by changes in the structure of occupations from one job over and one employer over one lifetime to multiple jobs in a lifetime. So individuals must manage their own careers, and that may seem like a no-brainer to us today. But there was a time, I can remember certainly early in my career, where the perception was that employers were kind of like the benevolent family, benevolent parents that looks after you as an employee. And of course, we saw a lot of upheaval in the 70s and 80s and so on with restructuring in organizations where people were forced out of these organizations where they felt like they were part of the family. So this is a different perspective today, that we must manage our own careers individually. And this approach also focuses on careers not as lifetime employment, but as a way of providing meaning to individuals. Narrative counseling is kind of considered a subset of constructivist approaches. In applying these methods, clients will narrate stories about their past and present career development and construct their future career. Meaning is derived from their stories by attending to what clients feel is important or unimportant in their description of their career or their life. Now, I don't know if you've done a dependable strengths activity yet in one of your other courses, but the idea behind that activity is to ask your client to tell you a story about a situation where they felt very successful or very proud of what they achieved. So, in telling you that story, the client tells you a lot about themselves. And what you want to think about as you're listening to it is, what is the meaning of this story for the client? Why is it important? Why out of all the things that they've done in their life, is this the story that stands out? So, doing that dependable strengths activity is really a form of narrative counseling. And I think you will probably experience that somewhere in one of your courses. A term that's used within narrative counseling is the idea of wavering, which is defined, which is how they define career indecision. So if a client comes to see you, quite often they are wavering. They're uncertain about how to proceed and how to move forward. And in particular, if they are not sure what type of occupation or career or job they want to target, then certainly we can see them as wavering. This is a sign, according to narrative counseling, that the client is in the process of making change and moving toward finding meaning in their career path. Now, that all sounds very nice, but it's also quite often very uncomfortable. We've talked through chapter 10, theories of change and transition, how uncomfortable that can be in different parts of the process. So just because the client is uncomfortable doesn't mean that this is not a necessary part. And this is something you want to help clients understand, that there are parts of this that are going to be uncomfortable. And most often clients are seeing the CDP, if we're going along with the idea of telling stories, because there's a pause in the story or there's a plot twist in the story. For example, somebody gets hired early in their career. Maybe they work in that job for a few years and are starting to move up the company ladder and getting promotions, and suddenly they get laid off. They were expecting to keep that trajectory going, and maybe they were targeting a specific job that they wanted to be promoted to. So they got laid off. That's could be seen as a pause. It could be seen as a plot twist. Maybe someone is very happy in their career and then they get injured or they get a disability and they are unable to continue working in that career. That's a pause or a plot twist. So the CDP helps the client determine their future direction and to clarify plots in the story. So, how would you like the story to unfold from here? Is this something that you want to explore with the client? Is it a change in their career, in their job, in their location? So, these are the types of things that you would explore as potential future plots in the client's story. Narrative counseling incorporates the concept of life designing, which comes from Savickas and other theorists that have worked with him or that are part of his model. The counselor examines the construction of these stories through four phases: constructing, deconstructing, reconstructing, and co-constructing. And I'll just break those down for you here. So constructing is usually made up of small stories. The client will maybe tell you a series of stories about different jobs that they've held or experiences they've held. So these can be seen as micro narratives. And again, that idea of the dependable strengths activity is an example of that. It helps the counselor see how the client organizes their view of themselves, their identity, and their career. So in choosing these small stories, it tells you a lot about what's important to the client. You want to deconstruct the story as the CDP, or listen to parts of the story, especially the ones that indicate self criticism and self limitations. So you want to just listen to those parts of the story. And these are the types of things that may come up. If you're doing your common assessment as part of needs assessment, clients will quite often tell you stories. Then we want to help the client to reshape the story into one that has positive outcomes in which values and strengths of the client are present. So we want to help the client take from whatever their experiences are, whatever that story is, and reshape it into one that shows, what are the benefits of that experience that you had. Now, it's not to say that we're going to say, yes, you got fired, but there's let's look at the bright side. Let's look at the silver lining. What you want to do is to help the client identify, what are the strengths that came out of that? What are the positives that might have come out of that? And even if, it could be the person that got laid off, yes, it's devastating for them, but maybe look at all of the strengths and skills that they developed during the time that they were in that job. And that provides them a foundation in which to go forward and look for a new job or new occupation. So that moves us into co-construction, where the counselor, the CDP, and the client identify present and future themes and co-create a new perspective on their career prospects and goals. So this is very similar to, anything that you're doing with the client in terms of, for example, working them through that common assessment model. You'll see some similarities to the steps and the things that you're focusing on as you work through that process. So the goals in narrative counseling are to identify a pattern of the individual's life, really their working life, their career development, to help form a sense of the client's identity by listening to their story, what's important to them, thinking again about that concept of salience from Super's model. What seems to be salient to this client? What do they emphasize about the work that they've done that seems to be important to them? And of course, a goal is to find out about the client's goals for the future or help uncover some goals if the client is unclear. Now, you will see in chapter 11 a breakdown of one of the theorists in this field and his particular process, Cochrane's narrative career counseling. And this refers to a process with 7 episodes or phases in career counseling using a narrative approach. It focuses on the client's active role in telling their story. And the goal in telling and completing these episodes or chapters in their story is to help the individual move toward making a decision. So it kind of unpacks, what has happened to the client, gives them a chance to take stock of where they're at now, and what their experiences so far in their career have meant to them, and then helps you to work towards creating some goals and, if necessary, making a specific decision about what to pursue. So these are Cochrane's 7 steps, and I'm just going to go through them real quickly. I really encourage you to read this chapter and to read through a little more detail of each of these steps, but let's just look at each one quickly. So step 1 is elaborating the career problem. So clarifying the client's concerns and the gap between their current and desired situation. Again, this fits very nicely with common assessment because we want to find out, what are the client's concerns? What is it that they're aiming for? What do they see as their barriers? That's all part of the common assessment model. And of course, the client has to want to do something about, that gap or that barrier, whatever they're encountering. But in working with them, they're uncertain how to do that. That's why they're sitting in front of you. We can uncover elements of the career problem with conversation and anecdotes. In other words, getting them to tell stories. Now, we can also use card sorts, interests or value inventories, ability tests, and even drawings. And I will show you an example of what that might look like in just a moment. Although some of these other tools are more prescriptive in nature, for example, if you did the Holland assessment, that is more of a prescriptive model. It can still be used within this descriptive application of narrative counseling. Step 2 is composing a life history. So you're gathering information about the client's interests, values, abilities, and motives. Doesn't that sound a bit like Frank Parsons' step 1, Who Am I? We want to, again, attend to the way the individuals select and organize their life stories. It tells you a lot about what's important to them and what their values are. You might even ask the client to tell about their history from a third person perspective, and like they're telling a story about someone else. And then you can point out the positive or negative meanings to identify the patterns and themes. But of course, we always want to defer to the client's interpretation of these things. In particular, you want to pull out and emphasize the client's strengths. And sorry, that should say number 3, composing a life history. No, sorry, that is part of the same step. It is part of step 2. I thought that was a mistake. So in addition to the narrative description of life histories, other techniques may be used, such as success experiences, that dependable strengths activity, a lifeline activity. There's other things called a career-ogram, a career genogram, life chapters. These are really neat activities to do with clients if you have the luxury of the time. And I'm going to encourage you to please read starting on page 302, 303 of the text to get a full description of these techniques. But I'm going to show you the lifeline right now. This is one of my favorite exercises, and I have posted an instruction sheet that explains to you how to do this exercise. I really encourage you to try this for yourself. What you do is start any place you want on the lifeline. This person started with high school graduation. You can go back all the way to the first day you were born if you want to, but you're going to draw a line across the sheet, and then you're just going to indicate uh, different key points in your life, experiences that stand out, big changes that happen. You can do it all on one line, or you can do like it has here. This person sort of listed these high points. These are things that, they felt very good about, and low points, job loss. Um, so and there's some explanation that might be needed here. So why is this a low point? If the person volunteered abroad, maybe in the end, something bad happened and they were very disappointed. A difficult breakup, that's on the high points. So that there's a little story there. We don't generally dive too much into the client's personal life, but whatever they put on this lifeline obviously is important to them. So I would encourage you just to take some time to try that lifeline exercise. You may, in fact, find it very helpful when it's time to do your final essay in the course because you're going to be exploring a particular theory that resonates for you. So this is one way to try out this theory and see, what kind of insights do you have about yourself once you do this lifeline activity. And by the way, this is not my lifeline. This is one that I just created. Asked ChatGPT to create one for me. So that's an example. And it doesn't have to be this colorful with little pictures on it. You can just draw a line and then just, put the text in there to indicate the different key points in your life. The third step in Cochrane's model is eliciting a future narrative. Clients consider their strengths, interests, and values as they may appear in the future, as they would like to have them appear in the future. We might also use some of the same techniques from the previous step I just mentioned, or a future career autobiography, or a guided fantasy. Again, look at page 304 of the textbook. These are really neat techniques to use. They do require a bit more of an advanced set of counseling skills, and also you need to of course, be working in a setting that allows you the time to do these kinds of activities. So in step 3, clients project what they would consider to be success in their future lives. And you, as the CDP, might provide a written and narrative report that helps the client to move into action. So they are telling you these stories. You need to find some way to capture, the gist of them, the main ideas, and use that to identify themes that the client might want to actually see realized in their future career. Step 4 is the reality construction. This is where we start getting into action. This is a significant component in narrative counseling. Yes, it's nice to tell all of these stories, but we want to ultimately, just as we do in the common assessment model, move the client into action. So clients may need to try out a variety of actions. It gets them starting to actualize this, put it out in the real world. Clients can get information from a variety of sources about different occupations. They could, for example, start doing information meetings where they talk to people in various occupations, and then they could maybe try to imagine themselves doing that occupation. Do they see themselves working in that field or doing job shadowing? That's even more effective to actually be in the actual work environment. Step 5 is changing the life structure. Of course, when clients come to see a CDP, they usually expect some kind of a change to the situation or to the ones themselves or both. Change brings new opportunities, but can also raise anxieties about failing. So this is where we want to really encourage our clients to, be clear about what they're moving towards and make sure we provide them the resources that they need to support them in moving ahead. Um, so when changing one's life structure, Cochrane calls this a career project, something that you're working on as part of your career development. And themes can give positive meaning to what the client has done and what they may want to do in the future. So again, part of your role is to really pull those themes out of the stories the client tells you. Step 6 is where we actually enact the role. The individual gets out there and actually does it, takes action. So they're going to try out activities that are meaningful and hopefully enjoyable for them. And if they're not, it makes it clear to the client, gee, I really don't think I would like to do that type of work, or I'm really not interested in that. The client may have to try a variety of activities like job shadowing, and some activities may not be immediately attainable. So if someone wants to be a really successful, popular athlete, they, can't suddenly be on the Maple Leafs hockey team or playing for the Toronto Blue Jays. But they may try out small roles and activities that could lead to that desired future activity. And then lastly, crystallizing a decision. And this term is also used in Super's model and has, similarities in terms of its meaning. It occurs when the gap between the client's problem and the ideal possible solution diminishes, identifying, eliminating obstructions, enacting opportunities, and reflecting on career decisions. So basically, deciding and moving forward. And there may be internal or external obstructions. So internal would be like fear of failure. External might be lack of funds to go back to school, but you as the CDP would work with the client to identify those different barriers and take action to try and remove them or mitigate them. Savickas is also covered in this chapter, his career construction theory. This is considered a meta theory, a more comprehensive umbrella theory derived from a number of other frameworks. And it views career theory from the social constructionist point of view, emphasizing again the point of view of the client, how they construct their careers, and give meaning to career related behavior. He also emphasizes adaptation to environment and events and places less emphasis on the idea of stages of life, such as Super might, or the idea of Super's career maturity. Key concepts in the theory are vocational personality. This is borrowed from Holland's theory, and he does use those codes to understand the client's story and generate possibilities to explore. He also talks about the idea of career adaptability, and that includes concern, which is planning and preparing for the future, control, taking control of one's own career, curiosity about choices that are available and exploring those choices, and confidence to move forward with whatever decisions or choices the client makes. A third concept is the idea of life themes, understanding basic themes in the client's life and the meaning they hold for the client. So again, that idea of meaning is most important in all of these narrative and constructionist theories. So please read a bit more about these key concepts in chapter 11 of the textbook. There are 10 steps to the process suggested by Savickas. I didn't want to bore you by going through them all in this lecture. You'll see them outlined in pages 316 to 320 in the text in Chapter 11, The Case of Tiffany. So read through that, and I think it'll give you a sense of how that would flow. And he says the steps don't necessarily have to be sequential or followed in entirety, and they can suggest different ways to explore the client's story to understand how they've constructed their career from an early age. So those are the general ideas of constructivist and narrative approaches. I really like these particular approaches. Especially love activities like the Lifeline and some of the others that are outlined in the chapter. So, in terms of your own work and applying this particular framework, it's really essential to be aware of your own construction of reality. And we've talked about this, I'm sure, in previous lectures. Think of an occupation that you would hate to do and that would not hold any meaning for you. Now imagine you're working with a client whose goal is to work in that occupation. What would your internal feelings be about the client's goal? What story do you tell yourself about this kind of work? So you need to be attentive to your internal narration, your internal discussion as you're working with the client. And what would you need to be careful of in working with this client? Well, of course, you would not want to project your own perceptions and feelings about that type of work to the client. So you need to put a bracket around that, leave it at the door of your office or your cubicle, wherever you're working, and just focus on the meaning of these particular careers for your clients. So again, it's so important to be aware of your own preferences and biases and avoid letting them influence how you respond to the client's goals and dreams. Don't diminish the client's dreams and goals. And I heard someone many years ago when I was studying in this field say, don't be a dream stealer. Don't take away your clients' dreams. We're there to help shine a bright light on the things they most want to do, to encourage them and empower them. So that's all for this lecture. Thank you very much for watching. Please do ensure that you read Chapter 11. And as always, let me know if you have any questions.